calls out from within us. Heavy metal is that way for us. And then, you're just going through life, and then all of a sudden you hear it, and you're like, oh, now life makes sense.
No other musical genre in history has been as polarizing as heavy metal, a genre characterized by loud, distorted guitars, screaming vocals, and the questioning of authority and standard conventions. Heavy metal came into its own in the early 70s as a direct response to the Cold War, the global political climate, and the rise of individualism. It has been the subject of many debates, political platforms, and religious condemnation. At first glance, heavy metal and religion would seem to lie at the complete opposites of the spectrum, with absolutely no intersectionality. And in some cases, this would be correct. However, going beyond just a cursory look, there is an intricate interplay between them. After careful examination, it is clear that the genre serves as a platform for expressions of devotion, defiance, and opposition, and can serve as a source of spiritual connection, a means of rebellion against religious norms, or a vehicle for critical examination of religious themes. In this project, I will shed light on the difficult and ever-changing relationship between artistic expression and religion and faith, hopefully enabling those unfamiliar with the genre to gain a more well-rounded perspective. Full disclosure, there are many different subgenres under the heavy metal umbrella, and not all of them fit neatly into the categories I've laid out above. However, for the sake of this study, I have focused on those bands and musicians that are influenced by religion, in this case, Christianity, in either a positive or a negative light.
Heavy metal was inspired by, I suppose, the countercultural embrace of the seemingly conservative values of Christianity. I mean, it's for most of it, it's a performative, dramatic thing. I think it's a cinematic thing, and it was inevitable that as '60s counterculture took its kind of root in the, I suppose, in young people's consciousness, that invariably rock and roll was distilled down into what's the best way of giving a middle finger to conservative post-secular values, and that was via rock and roll. If you go then distill it down into heavy metal, it makes sense that it would become a satanic or something like this, or at least aesthetically countercultural, embracing what was perceived as I suppose rebellion, kind of like all that kind of thing.
You have a foundation on which you stand, and the foundation can be really, really fucked up sometimes. Some people can make the greatest music. For example, let me think about this Norwegian guy, Varg Vikernes, who, has committed some strange acts according to his beliefs, and continues to do so, inspired by beliefs that, are not very healthy for mankind, I believe. But does that taint the music? That's hard to say. It's up to the subjective person. I know a lot of people who listen to Barzum, the band, his band and whatever, and they're not, about white supremacy, and they're not, about that stuff.
Now, Aralu main idea, it's against the religions. Because we are here in Jerusalem, we can see the fight in our eyes between the three main religions, the Islamic, the Judaism, and the Christianity. So when you go in the old city of Jerusalem and you see them fight each against, you say, for what? Why? We are all human beings. We are all have our faiths. Okay, I don't know if there is God or is not God, but the conflict is so hard and is so hatred between the people because the religion. So it's so stupid. You know, the main reason for wars, from the old days today, it's about religion. Some Christian slaughter Muslims, Muslims slaughter Jews, Jews slaughter. It's a circle, so it's stupid. And I try, we around we have 8 albums, and we are talking about that all the time. Stop believing this stupid faith and just keep with good life, drink some beer, good food, travel in the world, see some people, meet some people, make some good music, and that's it. We don't need this stupid religion. It's just bring us to for fighting.
That's the main concept behind our music, is kind of speaking, why we use kind of a lot of inversion imagery, and obviously the lyrical content that we do is that it's halting a lot of progress. These traditions and things that have kind of been passed down to us and are in our framework of our societal, how we conduct ourselves and how our society just kind of exists, are based around a lot of these outdated ideals that are halting a lot of progress. So that's why for us, we're all about the paradigm shift. It really just takes thinking outside of these things, leaving these things behind to push forward and progress. That's kind of our stance on it, I guess. Our intent is obviously to look imposing with the costumes. Sometimes we talk about uncomfortable stuff. There's going to be uncomfortable imagery, but that's not the intent behind it. The intent behind the name is somewhat, I wouldn't call it shock value, but it is meant to, again, invert where the name comes from and use it to err on the side of sacrilege. And, the name I came across in a book called Snow Crash. It was referenced. The tongue of Eden being, the fictional divine language where essentially using this language can be used so that no matter, all humans can understand each other, right? And to us, that language is music. So taking it out of a divine context and using it for our purposes was the intent there. And, the whole allegory of the Garden of Eden and the Tree of Knowledge and, it being forbidden and things of that nature, it just works towards our goal with the message.
If you see a black metal band, you're most likely going to see an inverted cross. You're going to hear some words. You're going to see a Bible ripped up or set on fire. I think without Christianity, I don't really know what black metal would be.
Right, that's an interesting topic, right? Because I've actually been thinking about that and doing some research. Is it just a reaction to Christianity, or you think it would actually be there?
I think it's just a reaction to, you go back in the early days when you're talking of the bands like Mayhem and stuff, right? That so sort of like the fathers of black metal, you could say, right? The church burnings that happened in Norway that are associated with that, right? But I do believe that when it really took fold, it molded into what it is today, which is anti-religion. But I do think that without religion being involved, just with that one genre there, I don't think it would be a thing. I think it is what's fueled it. And then if you go through the time and the period of time and ages and you watch it, MTV, right? You started seeing music videos of Demi Borgir. You started seeing Cradle of Filth, right? You started seeing these bands, and now they're able to really project their image on TV, which is taking them higher. It's the same as you go back to early day Marilyn Manson, right? What was he always against? Religion.
Right.
And look how popular he got from it. Still Mayhem today is still performing, right? Obviously, their stage is set to be dark. It is set to be shocking, right? It is, they used to carry like rotten pig heads and stuff around. Like, they've done a lot throughout the years. Right. But I feel for certain bands, it is how they truly feel. They're into that music. They love the feel of the music. They know what it stands for, and that's what they're about. I absolutely 100% believe there are bands in the scene that are about it. And then you go to the other side of more of the mainstream, like Marilyn Manson, who I believe. Do I necessarily believe that he don't believe? I believe that he is against it, absolutely. But he did a shock factor,
right?
He went from a poor wannabe rock star to a well-known rock star and very wealthy now, right?
Think about different from what Madonna did, right? I mean, Madonna and her crucifix in the 80s, she did all that, and then she's the biggest thing in the world, right?
Right. What's one way to piss off a mass people at once, right?
Especially in a Christian society.
Go anti-Christian and see what happens.
Right.
Even from my days of touring with my black metal bands, we saw and we heard things, and it was nothing for us to be on a lineup and be the only black metal band. And we didn't mind that, but you could instantly see some faces change as soon as we would come out, do a ritual. We got the face paint, we're spewing blood. I had Bible setting on fire, like. We did so much shock things, right? And you can instantly see people like, oh no, like just look disgusted and walk away. And then you would have the other ones up at the front stage just going with you,
Catholicism, Christianity, and whatnot. They have their churches and things that will kind of expose you and being brought down by family members and whatnot. You don't get that much with more obscure religious sources, but lyrically, through a lot of heavy metal, there's a lot of different avenues that like to explore that dark arts kind of philosophy. And if it wasn't for that stuff, I would have never been exploring it myself.
Especially how Christian culture has spread across the world is just it can ignite things really easily. People have very strong feelings. It elicits either feelings of intense devotion, intense hatred, or discomfort because of previous religious trauma. And being able to use those symbols, if you're saying, okay, this is a satanic band or anti-Christian band, I feel like they're doing it, number one, because it will get someone to think. It will get their hackles raised and their heart pumping and that emotion going to get a response, and I think it's a spread. You've got some bands who are doing it because they specifically are trying to call out trauma caused by the church, or they're working through their own trauma. And then you've got the Norwegian black metal bands. It's just like, a whole other thing, and I think it's also very powerful because it makes you feel like you're taking on something much bigger than yourself, because the church is so old and so established, and so embroiled in Europe, embroiled in political theater, that to take it on is also fits in with one of the doctrines of metal, which is to kind of like say fuck you, stick it to the man, right? Very much, you know, and that's what's really interesting too if you look at the modern movement of humanistic Satanism, where they talk about the body is inviolable, blah blah blah. Like it's kind of related to that, like that idea of I'm the master of my own fate. And it's not coming from a place of, oh, I'm going to burn babies. It's coming from my body is my own. Even metalheads can agree there is evil, there is bad, right? But that's not, dark isn't always evil.
Let's first start with, if you have light, you have to have darkness. If you have white, you have to have black, and then there's a billion shades in between. If you have Christian metal, you certainly can have satanic metal, black metal, etc., etc. That's, again, artistic expression. As far as black metal bands or satanic bands or whatever using imagery or whatever from Christianity, I would say that both of those religions are using stuff from religions before them, right? You know, Christianity certainly wasn't the first religion. People were believing in different gods and entities way before that came along. So that's the case, and humanity's been around here. We'll spit it in there in about 200,000 years. Organized, you know, thinking rational humans with religion, etc., probably in the last 9,000 years. Obviously, if Christianity is only 2,000 years old, they were believing in something before that. So it all comes from someplace else. Whether that's the symbols on the wall in Egypt or in South America or whatever, all these current religions today are all based off of that stuff.
The metal, I suppose, it's the tradition of it's the aesthetic tradition that, you know, is distilled down through Arthur Brown and Alice Cooper, and then the lyrics of Black Sabbath. And the first band, I think you probably crystallized them all into what we know now as Venom, I guess. You know,
Right.
Live Like in League with Satan, Welcome to Hell. That was the kind of, you know, the real, for me, that's the real beginning of where you get black metal and death metal and stuff like that from. It's an awful lot of it's performative, dramatic. An awful lot of it is just a countercultural artistic movement that was sort of crystallized in the sort of initial aesthetic impulse of heavy metal. And then, of course, there's something very real as well, where people are drawn to identification with the sort of rebellious spirit, the Luciferian spirit, whatever you want to call that, the Loki-like playfulness of having sympathy for the devil. And I suppose that's just part and parcel of the tradition of heavy music, to have a kind of sympathetic view of the devil. And that sort of makes sense if you take the sort of post-Second World War history of the West, I suppose, even though you can find it, of course, in many other things preceding that. So it makes sense that, the Rolling Stones were sympathizing with the devil and not, eulogizing.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily frown on people for, having an artistic output that doesn't necessarily reflect their core beliefs. You know what I mean? If that is the fact, then we need to arrest every single Cannibal Corpse fan out there, including me, because when you're listening to those songs, if that's genuinely what you believe should be happening all of the time, there's something really, really wrong with you. You know what I mean? Yes, obviously there's going to be bands out there that do this kind of thing for shock value. But as we've already established, mentioning Kiss and Ozzy and Alice Cooper and Marilyn Manson, shock value is there as part of what metal will be. It's always there to push the boundaries, regardless of whether it's subject matter or whether it's tuning or whether it's speed or anything like that. Maybe digressing slightly here because I'm a big film nut and that kind of thing, and I've always said in relation to my taste in films and literature, it very much mimics what I listen to musically, is that I'm a bit of a sensory hedonist. I watch the films that are difficult to watch because I want to be pushed visually, aurally, all senses be pushed to the absolute limits. And the subject matter within songs will push people to different limits. I love Deicide. I went to see them last week. I've got one of the logos from Once Upon a Cross tattooed on my shoulder, but I am not inherently anti-Christian. It's not that element of Deicide that makes me love Deicide, but the bands that stir my emotions, the songs that can make me break down and cry, those kind of big, strong feelings come from other ends of metal. But those bands that will do that to me probably won't do that to somebody else. But Deicide might make them very, very angry and strike that chord with them. Music is art, and every single artist should be free to make whatever the hell they want, because metal is religion. You know what I mean? If we're going to say you can worship whatever God you want, believe whatever belief structure you want, then within metal and music in general, we should never ever restrict that creative and emotional output from the artists.
Part of the DNA of heavy metal is there is a religious component to it. Music in and of itself has a spiritual component to it. Not a Christian component necessarily, but a spiritual component. Now, as a Christian, I believe that God is the creator of music. He's the architect of it. He's the, an A on a pipe organ is A, C sharp, and E. An A on a distorted guitar is A, C sharp, and E. When Slayer plays an A chord, it's A, C sharp, and E. When the Gaithers play an A chord, it's A, C sharp, and E. So, the creative music, we use music for whatever purpose we decide to use it for. Are we using it to glorify God? Are we using it to glorify self? Or are we using it to glorify Satan? Are we using it to push whatever worldview or agenda that we have? We're still using a gift that comes from God. So I think it's inescapable, so I don't know, we use the word complicated. I think it's complicated because we made it complicated. I don't think, in and of itself, music is complicated as far as, where does it come from? Of course, that's my worldview. That's where I come from. So, but if you're talking about heavy metal, being at odds with Christianity, now that's a more specific question. And, I think heavy metal has a rebellious element. Rock and roll has a rebellious element. And so for metal to be rebellious, it has to rebel against the status quo. And part of that status quo is the mainstream conservative church. And so that's also inherent. So the complication, I believe, comes from you have something that was created by God, that's music, and it has a spiritual element. Then you got man who says, well, I'm going to use this tool as a rebellious vehicle against that. That becomes complicated. So, and I think that causes it's what I call the kerrang. It's just a word I made up a long time ago. Kerrang of the guitar, kerrang of the cymbals. The kerrang has nothing to do with the English magazine. Kerrang of the force of metal or punk, or you're trying to create something that is very forceful music. It's forceful. I'm going to be forceful about my worldview, forceful about my religious beliefs, forceful about my animosity toward the machine, as it were. And so you get this of these two things where you have this music created, music itself is created by God. Man who says, I'm going to use this as a vehicle to push my worldview and agenda. Boom. And that's where the complication, I believe, comes from. Suddenly you have this this conflict between something that was created by God and man's desire to put forth an idea, a concept, a worldview by using it. And if it's opposed to God, there's this conflict. So I think that is a part of where people who are against God, say they hate Jesus, hate the church, get really even more vehement about their stance within their art. Now, as we talked about before, you could probably talk to these people off of stage. They Nergal wipes the makeup off, and he's probably a really nice guy. I've never met him, but he's probably a really nice guy. And I could probably sit down and have a cheeseburger with him and some fries and talk and hang out, and we could probably get along just fine. Right? He's not going to agree with me as a follower of Christ. I'm not going to agree with him as somebody who lifts up the name of Satan. Right? We're not going to agree, but that doesn't mean we can't get along. So. Right. I think the conflict, the biggest conflict, I think that heavy metal has with religion, or the complication, as you put it, I think the biggest complication is that they're using a tool that was designed from God to present a message that's anti-God. So I think that's part of the complication. But then when you talk about the complication of heavy metal musicians who and I'm going to say heavy metal and punk rock musicians that are fighting against a system that they see as unjust. And you know what? We can, as believers, you and I could come up with hundreds, if not thousands, of examples where the church has done things they shouldn't have done, where they're not following what's laid out in scripture. They're following the traditions of man, which Jesus already said it equals death. So if you're putting the name tag of Christian on you, but you're not following what he said, there's going to be a problem. And guess who's going to see it? Everybody, right? Heavy metal musicians see that hypocrisy, and I think that's a lot of where the angst comes from, is watching Christians in their hypocrisy. Well, Jesus didn't like that either. People who follow Jesus don't like that. We're all in agreement, really. I mean, metal musicians that hate the hypocrisy of Christianity, I agree, right? I don't have any problem with that. They're right. I agree with it. I guess with it. Jesus himself. So it's odd that we probably have a lot more in common than we have not in common when it comes right down to it. The difference is you got one group of people who's submitted to his lordship, and then another group of people that says, I will not bow down to this God that I disagree with. Well, if they really knew what the God was saying, if they knew what Jesus was actually saying, they probably agree with it more than disagree with it.
Religion is the same way. It's this understanding that there's something higher than ourselves, and it's trying to find, okay, how do I connect myself with that? Does that mean that I need to follow a certain set of rules or some practices, or how can I connect to whatever it is that's outside of myself, that's greater than myself, so that I can connect with them, with that thing, whatever that is. So I just feel like they go together. Heavy metal also creates an avenue for a passion that is unlike any other music. Now, you can also say classical is very passionate and drives the emotion and brings up the emotion, but classical music doesn't have the added benefit of lyrics. Take that same passion that classical music has and take it to another level, because it can be very much a thinking man's music.
You know, we do a lot of campy stuff, and some of it's lighthearted, some of it's not. But the next album is probably going to be scarier and darker. And I'd like the next album to legit be scary. You know, I don't think anything Grave Robber's really done has been all that scary. It's been more campy B-movie misfits. The next album, I'm going to go a little bit more Wednesday 13-ish, maybe. You know, as far as the scariness, not the sound. I don't think we've crossed the line, personally. I mean, and I don't know too many Christian bands that have crossed the line. In fact, I think Christian bands should probably be a little more. I just did a show with Salt, which is John DeGroff from the original Petra, the very early Petra. You know, it was kind of a hippie fest. All these old hippies, you know, they're in the 80s and 90s and 70s, and like show up, and it was more uplifting and joyful. And there's a place for that. But there's also a place for art to not always be pretty. You know, you go to an art museum. I went to Washington, D.C., the National Art Museum, and there's beautiful paintings, but then there's some really dark things too. And I get just as much enjoyment out of seeing these darker pieces as well as things that are uplifting and joyful. So yeah, I just think there's a place for it, you know?
Because I think at the end of the day, Christianity sort of hinges on the crucifixion, which is probably as dark and I don't know, darkest day in human history. I mean, not only was he beaten beyond recognition, you know, put on the cross by very proficient killers, the Romans, and his closest comrades of 3 years are nowhere to be found. They all turned their backs on him, went and hid. And you read the depiction of it. An earthquake happens, storms immediately roll in. It's a very dark day. I mean, legit dark, but dark also spiritually. So, and I agree. I mean, there's a lot of blood and darkness and horror and skulls, and there's the Valley of Dry Bones. There's the Golgotha means place of skulls, the place where Jesus was crucified. So there's enough subject matter built into it. You need the dark part of it to shine the light on what actually happened. So it's not namby-pamby. It's like, this is the reality of what happened. This is the reality of what he did. This is a historical fact counted in multiple places outside of Scripture. We know this is a historical event, but what really took place? And so you got to look at what happened for real, and it is a dark story, and not just that one story. There's plenty of dark things that are in Scripture that, as a people, we don't like that. That's uncomfortable. Well, Christianity is not called us to a place of comfort, and that's part of the hypocrisy I think that people see outside the church, is that these guys just think they're better than everybody else. Heck no, man. I think I'm worse than everybody else, because that light has exposed my sin and my problems and my hangups and my scars and my wounds, and I definitely don't think I'm better than anybody else. I can't, because I've been exposed to him, the one that paid for it, also exposed it, handed me to myself on a silver platter and said, "This is the real you. You're not as cool as you think you are."
It's a little different, than we have a specific quote unquote message that we're trying to get out. We have been into metal our entire lives. Quite a few of the members, they were metalheads long before they became Christians. Myself, I grew up as a Christian, so I came across metal just like everybody else, in junior high and on from there. And so individually, we aren't any different from any other metalhead. We at the core of our being, we are metalheads. And so when we're writing music and when we're making albums and all of that, and then I do mainly the vocals and the concepts and deal with the artwork and things like that, it comes from the exact same place that any other metalhead or metalhead in a metal band comes from. I just want to make the best music that we can possibly make, high quality music, good songs, and then I just write what is coming from inside of me, and hopefully that generates some thought about it. Hopefully it's intelligent, and or some songs are purely entertaining, and that's what I want. I want the same thing as probably most bands that are actually serious about their lyrical content, that they want to posit an idea and cause people to think about it. That's the only vehicle that has the capability of expressing it in the way it needs to be expressed, and that can express it in the totality of what it is. There's no other music except for maybe classical that can show the power, and there's no other music that can show the gentleness and the beauty except for maybe classical again. But what classical can't do and metal can is show the extreme nature of it, the danger, the terrible things that are involved in that amount of power. The things that are genuinely terrifying. There's if you think that what's happening in the world is terrifying, and there's many, many terrifying things, the things that go on with war or with human trafficking or whatever, you have terrifying things. The things that are going on in the spirit realm are that times a million. And in so much as we can experience that in this finite world, metal is the only vehicle that can get us close.
Roderick Ninian Smart was a Scottish writer and university educator. He was a pioneer in the field of secular religious studies, and he is best known for his 7-dimension definition of religion. According to Ninian Smart, all religions have 7 dimensions. They are ritual, he defined as repeated actions, material, items and places, social, peoples and roles, experiential, experience, mythological, stories, ethical, rules and guidelines, and doctrinal, beliefs and meanings. For the next segment of this documentary, I intend to use these 7 dimensions of religion to prove that heavy metal is indeed a religion.
Always weird for me when I sign, but I've signed people's stuff and they're like, "This is my religion, man." And I'm like, okay. So I've never really thought about it, right? But when you think about, when I think about my past and my careers and what I've done with it, and I've met these individuals that say that, I do believe that some people hold it as their religion, man, because you may not go to an organized religion such as Christianity or Satanism or pagan or whatever be. Metal may be the thing that makes them happy. Metal is the thing that makes them relate to certain issues and maybe even helps them resolve battles within themselves. I know music does it for me, right? So I don't see why it couldn't be considered as a religion to some. And again, I've met individuals that have said that is their religion. And when you look at it, and we all need something in this world. We all need something that we can relate to help us get through life. But life's not easy. Life is hard, right?
Yeah, you have to have some sort of ritual to continually retell a story, or re-emphasize a belief.
It's a ritual when you go to a show. I believe it's a ritual when you listen to music, when you do it properly. You can do it on the side, you're driving down the street and doing whatnot. Or then you can really sit down, close your eyes, share the moment with people, of similar minds. And better yet, people who do not have similar minds, because then you can actually expand things. Same thing with writing music. I'm going off on a tangent here, but, what I do is I do this shit. I'm here at the studio with my guitar, and so that is ritual for me. That's the place where you can reach that kind of momentum. I think Heraclitus called it, the same seriousness as a child who's at play. You see that joyful concentration, and I think it really connects with elements of religion in a sense. It's a temple for many musicians. The studio, like the one I'm here at, is a sort of a sanctuary.
But when I was trying to find my place musically, I noticed when I went to gigs, someone else's shows, or I listened to music, the genre that had the most ritualistic connection to its contributing members was metal music. And I think about this a lot, and Campbell writes about this too, about the fact that older societies and communities, you had rites of passage and rituals that everyone universally accepted. And in our world, we don't really have that. And it's a pro and a con. For me, I think it's a good thing that not everyone is under the national church, right? That's a good thing. But with the loss of that, we've lost a sense of a universal ritual, and some people have argued that things like getting your license at 16 is now the rite of passage instead of joining the mystery cult, of the Oracle of Delphi or whatever, it's taking that place. But what I feel like is that both the subject matter, the poetry of metal music, which usually deals with more than just like relationships. You're dealing with war, you're dealing with society, you're dealing with death, grief, your place in the universe, struggles. All of these things have such an emotional connection to people that you go to these shows and you see that there are rituals being created that metalheads everywhere know. They know the rules of moshing, or at least you hope they do. Who holds the line, the different types of headbanging, all these different things, what you do, the etiquette around a show has created its own mystery cult, for lack of a better word. And I feel like within those parameters, people really are experiencing a sort of transcendence, which is what was the original goal of music in worship.
There's nothing quite like those big European festivals, man. Or I don't know that we have anything like that in the States that compares to those things. Yeah, it's almost a quest to get to them. You have to do so much planning and preparation to perform or to just go and be a part of it. And it's, 70,000 tons of metal. Fantastic to see those types of events happen.
I think metal, as a religion, as a sociological phenomenon, it's kind of logical that there's rank in the sense, not rank of superiority in terms of, genetic, la-di-da-di-dee-ba-da, but the fact that some fucking guys, excuse my profanity, they are just so good at what they're doing that they deserve to be treated as, a certain kind of almost priests, not priests, that's another loaded word, but as some kind of sage, as some kind of a spiritual leader of sorts. And they wield great power. Whether you agree or not that they are spiritual leaders, they wield a hell of a lot of power. And it's for good and for bad.
Especially for someone who maybe does not have a religion that they align with. This is a great place for community. Again, one of the one of the biggest things that I hear from a lot of my friends that are not in the metal world, when they meet somebody that is involved in the metal world, they're always like, these are the nicest people that I've ever fucking met. It's cathartic, it's therapeutic. And yeah, it's a level of understanding, especially like you mentioned earlier, when you could literally go across the planet and immediately have something in common with somebody that you've never met before in your life. You don't speak the same language. It's amazing.
These kind of places is where you find people that you can relate to. You can find friends. You can find love. You can find all the positive sides. And of course, the negative. I mean, it's the same with all religions.
You might connect with how a song made you feel, or something that song revealed to you, or you might connect with where you first heard that song or what was happening. For instance, my first listening to Sentence, I bought it at a mall in Overland Park, Kansas, and it was nighttime, and I bought it on a whim. Didn't know who they were. Cover looked cool. Popped it in the tape deck. As I'm driving out of the parking lot, it was pouring rain. I almost can't see. And so I have this darkness and the pouring rain and the roar from the rain. I can't see anything. I'm trying to drive, and Sentenced comes on with this music style that I, specifically that way, had not ever really heard before. And it was just amazing. And every time I listen to Sentenced, I go back to that location.
With Mythology, I would almost say that it goes a little bit deeper away from just the themes of the music. But if we look at some of the things and some of the stories that have been spread over the years in relation to bands and what have you, Ozzy biting the head off a bat. A lot of Alice Cooper's stage shows where he was bringing out, obviously there were magician's tricks, you know what I mean? But nobody had seen it this up close before for him, beheading things and biting the heads off snakes. Although his recent actions are probably a bit of a moot topic, but the press regarding Marilyn Manson in the 90s, do we really think that he lowered a cage of puppies into the crowd? Probably not. But that urban mythology that's come along with rock stars and, just pivotal musicians in general definitely lends to the elements that we're describing, where metal probably surpasses in religion a little bit. You don't get these mythologies about the Spice Girls. Within religion, obviously, over the years, the religious conflict is as old as religion itself. It's always been the concept of my God is better than your God.
And that actually goes back to the objects, right? Because the objects all harken back to some story, And a lot of metal bands create a symbol, and we've tried to do that from the beginning. Tried to create a logo that acts as a symbol, or with Possession, we actually created a symbol. So iconography is huge in heavy metal, part of it, and you can't escape it.
And the first thing that comes to mind when I think of rules and guidelines, I mean, just look at your pit, right? Everybody's out there doing whatever, but somebody falls, and it immediately stops, and you help that guy up. I mean, they're like, even if they're unspoken, and maybe that's not the best example, but I think that fits.
No, that's a perfect example, because you have this thing that looks like utter chaos from the outside, and it might feel completely uncontrolled when you're on the inside, but it has people that are watching. It has people that are waiting, and in the old days, there was one or two guys in the middle that weren't in the pit that policed the pit, basically, or stopped people if somebody fell down or whatever, got people out that were injured. You definitely have rules.
We've been in pits with the kids that are doing karate where they shouldn't be doing karate, and there's kind of just the nods and the looks that you give each other when somebody's there that is behaving in a way that is endangering the rest of the group. We've all been hit hard in a pit as well. Every single one of us has been hit hard and fallen over, and in all of the best pits, in the UK, up here at least, it's the rules of engagement. Somebody falls in the pit, no matter what is happening, everybody stops, everybody gets up. You know what I mean? So that, like I say, that element of group ethics and group not camaraderie. I don't really know what the word I'm looking for, but just this unwritten kind of feeling that just consumes you all with exactly the same motivation. Well, the beliefs and meanings side, even not if it's separate from the other six, it's the culmination of the other six. It's, like, your 10 commandments and that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? By observing 9 of them, you kind of automatically hit the 10th. That if you live by the 6 previous tenets, then the 7th will automatically manifest itself into being through your habitual behaviors and the routine, all of it.
Cynicism. I'm going back to Nietzsche again, but cynicism, he said, was the only way weak minds can handle the truth. That they lose faith, they don't have any beliefs, they go on a roller coaster of happenstance and whatever. And I think those people who are really passionate about what they're doing, at least they believe in themselves. They believe that their art has a meaning, and that belief, if it's good enough, it resonates. If it catches people's attention, if it really takes them somewhere else, it has an impact every time. And I believe the beliefs that I have received from metal are being good. Most of them, absolutely. Great majority of it has taught me basic human skills, survival skills, language skills,
Even if, for all the reasons we just listed, right? People wouldn't be here if they didn't believe in it, generally. If this type of music didn't move them or cause them to have these emotions and keep bringing them back if they didn't believe in it. So, or specific bands, even if they're not a part of the community, generally it only takes one to kind of bring you in, and slowly, there you go. Whatever denomination you're into, right?
So that brings me to the end, but that also ticks off every box in Ninian Smart's dimensions of religion. It fills every one of them, which would put it up there with a religion.
Yep. It's cool though, and I've thought about this, in passing before, but never taken the steps to actually go through and divine every single qualification. But yeah, it makes sense. It absolutely makes sense.
A lot of times we do treat it as religion, I think that, like, for example, even the regards that we would have for our idols, if you will, like, for example, like if I was in the same room as, let's say, I don't know, Rob Halford or James Hetfield or Tony Iommi, I would be as if I'm in the same room with God, that's right. Obviously I try and act cool on the outside, but on the inside, those are the feelings I would be experiencing. So right. It's kind of like, yeah. And so I do agree with your point on there, and I think that the point from an analytical perspective, the thing that I think very much justifies that theory is the fact that being a metalhead, or especially being in a band, makes zero sense logistically speaking, especially financially speaking. But there's something there which we're driven by, which does not fit into the categories and the standards of a modern society. And that the only other time that happens with people is with religion.
People generally aren't a passive participant in heavy metal, and is that there's something outside of ourselves, and we're trying to connect with that. Otherwise, there's no point. It's just a club. I'm part of a football club, or I'm part of a chess club, or whatever. Nobody's going to say that chess has some transcendent meaning, but I think that people truly do believe that metal is something greater than themselves that they want to be part of. So
the concept of music and religion being so intertwined that I think in those early civilizations and those kind of when humans were starting to understand themselves, it was less fun as far as music is concerned. I don't mean that it wasn't fun orientated. Everything that music was based around ritual. It was based around celebration. It was based around the coming together of people, and very, very much intertwined within religion, to the fact where metal obviously, but all musical styles almost have that religious element. You know, you go to see, you know, Metallica or Slayer or, you know, whoever you're really, really into, and you are surrounded by like-minded people, you know, all focused on this one goal of being absorbed in the movement. That in itself is a very, very pseudo-religious element. In fact, it's not even pseudo, it is a religious element. You know, the bigger bands that have got, you know, obviously wonderful sound systems and all of that kind of stuff, the, you know, huge sweeping solos and choruses and that kind of thing are very, very reminiscent of hymns and mantras and chants going, you know, way, way back to when we were still, you know, banging rocks together in order to get something sharp enough to skin a fox. You know, it's all there, but it's, like I say, I think it's been intertwined for a lot longer than just, you know, a specific musical movement.
For some, metal is absolutely a religion, like no question about it. For others, like the bullet points mentioned, it definitely touches certain points, and in some aspect or way, I'm sure that a bunch of the audience members, you know, buy in at those levels, right? All of that stuff, like you said, it checks all those boxes at some degree or another.
I totally think that. And, you know, and it also kind of takes the power away from people saying, oh, well, if you're a minister or preacher, you're ordained, you have some sort of special authority, direct line to God. And I've always had problems with that, because it's like we're all human. Not one more of us is more holy than the other. And so it's almost like being a lay preacher. There's that call and response. There is that leading someone in that catharsis. It doesn't mean I'm better than them. It doesn't mean I'm more holy than them. It just means that I am the vehicle for that particular instance.
If it is indeed a religion, who is our figurehead then? Who's the godhead or the deity?
Ooh, dude, that's a tough one, man. I mean,
to me, it's very obvious, but I'm curious what you think, because I've asked a couple people this already, and only a few have agreed with me.
Did you say Ozzy?
Yeah, absolutely. or Iommi, right? Either one.
Right. Because yeah, dude, because that.
Right, the first notes of Black Sabbath, the song, set the whole thing in motion.
Right.
Right, it's like the Big Bang.
It's definitely, yeah, man. I couldn't, because, you know, there's so many, you know, I'm a personal, obviously love Black Sabbath, I love Ozzy, right? But I also have always been a huge Alice Cooper fan, you know, and right. I believe Alice, if we're looking at that, I believe Alice Cooper set the shock.
Yeah.
He would be the deity for the shock, right?
Most people have been telling me Lemmy.
You know, Lemmy was popping in my head, but man, but Ozzy, dude, like I still would go for Ozzy, man, because Ozzy, I believe Ozzy sung true to what he wanted to write. He wrote good lyrics throughout the years. You know, he's a hell of a performer, and you know what? He's still kicking with us today, man. So,
you're right.
I mean, I'm sure it has some of the trappings of religion. It has a sort of orthodoxy to some of it. Certainly, black metal, in its most orthodox extreme form, has elements of the religious to it. I mean, it actively, openly embraces what you could call a kind of arcane side of spirituality. Now, who means it and who doesn't is open to question, but I certainly know people who mean it without a doubt, and that the embrace of that is very real. So, yes, there are elements of heavy metal, I suppose, that could be. There are elements of most groupthink, or there's elements of most countercultural movements that have elements of echoes of the religious to them.
Right.
And heavy metal, some you'd have to drill down a bit into to find them. But I think the easiest place to find them is probably black metal, I would imagine. Well, I know.